My name is Miller Files. I have walked through crime scenes where blood told the story before witnesses ever could. I have stood in courtrooms where silence weighed heavier than testimony. But there are cases that do not begin with violence. They begin with something quieter. A door closing, footsteps fading, a woman walking into the night. This is one of those cases. Her name was Esther González. She lived in Vallecas, a working-class neighborhood in Madrid, Spain. Vallecas is not a place of headlines. It is a place of routine. Morning coffee, evening television, neighbors who recognize each other by the rhythm of daily life. On a winter night in January of 2019, Esther stepped out of her apartment and into that familiar rhythm. Nothing about that moment looked unusual. Security cameras captured her walking calmly. She was not running. She was not looking over her shoulder. She was not carrying luggage or large bags. She appeared composed, almost casual. If you saw that footage without context, you would think she was stepping out for fresh air or meeting someone nearby, and that assumption would be the last normal thought anyone would have about that night. Esther never came back. When I first reviewed the file, I started with the basics. Time of departure, last known contact, phone activity, weather conditions, witness statements. I always begin with structure because structure reveals what chaos tries to hide. She left her home after receiving a short phone call, less than a minute. That detail caught my attention immediately. Short calls before departures are rarely accidental. They often contain instructions, a location, a reassurance, a signal. After that call, she put on her coat and walked out. Her phone signal remained within the Vallecas area for a short time, then it went dark. Not a battery drain, not a gradual loss of signal, a deliberate shutdown. Phones do not switch off by themselves in moments like this. The first 24 hours after a disappearance are critical. Investigators canvassed the area. They knocked on doors. They requested additional footage from nearby cameras. They searched vacant lots and abandoned structures. They checked hospitals. They ran her name through transport records. Nothing. No financial withdrawals, no transportation tickets, no social media activity, no digital trace suggesting preparation for a new life. People who choose to vanish leave patterns. Esther left none. I stood in Vallecas months after the disappearance, imagining the geometry of that night. The distance between her door and the corner, the shadows created by street lamps, the blind spots between cameras. I tried to feel what the city felt. A woman walks outside. She meets someone she recognizes. Perhaps she smiles. Perhaps she speaks quietly. There is no alarm in her posture, no raised voice, no struggle. If someone forced her, someone would have seen something. Vallecas is not empty at night. There are smokers on balconies, taxi drivers passing through, windows lit from insomniacs watching late television. There were no reports of screams. When a person disappears without a disturbance, I consider trust. Trust is the silent doorway through which many crimes pass unnoticed. If Esther stepped into a car, she likely did so without fear. The short phone call becomes central. Who called her? What was said? Why did she respond immediately? Investigators examined her circle. Family members, close friends, co-workers, former partners, anyone with access to her comfort zone. There were no overt threats reported, no recent public arguments, no visible crisis. Yet something moved her to step outside that night. In my career, I have learned that normal evenings can hold extraordinary decisions. A simple request, a quick meeting, 5 minutes outside. People underestimate how small a window it takes for life to fracture. The camera footage shows her turning a corner. After that, nothing. When footage ends abruptly, I do not assume mystery. I assume transition. The camera lost her. That does not mean the city did. Somewhere between that corner and the next unrecorded moment, something changed. Her phone was turned off within a tight radius of her home. That suggests proximity. Either she never left the neighborhood or she left in a vehicle whose movement was not captured immediately. The absence of evidence becomes evidence itself. No personal belongings found discarded, no sign of robbery, no credit card misuse. Whoever interacted with her that night did not act like a stranger seeking profit. This feels personal. When I review disappearances involving adult women without signs of forced entry or open violence, I study relationship patterns. Who did she trust enough to meet outside late at night? Who could approach her without raising alarm? The short call again. It was not a long, emotional conversation. It was efficient. That efficiency suggests familiarity. I imagine the call. I imagine a calm voice saying something simple. "Can you step outside for a minute?" I am nearby. I need to talk. It will not take long. She steps out, thinking she will return shortly. People often leave doors unlocked when they expect to be back quickly. There is something haunting about unfinished evenings. A cup left on a table, a light left on in a bedroom, a television remote untouched. In Vallecas, winter air moves through narrow streets. The temperature that night was cold but not severe. No storm. No event to mask sound. Silence. I have investigated violent abductions. They are loud. They are messy. They generate chaos. This did not. The more I study this case, the more I believe the pivotal moment occurred within seconds. A conversation, a shift in tone, a sudden decision. If Esther entered a vehicle voluntarily, that vehicle becomes the moving crime scene. And moving crime scenes are far harder to reconstruct than static ones. Without witnesses or clear camera tracking, vehicles dissolve into anonymity. There is another detail investigators considered. If a crime occurred, it likely happened quickly. Panic crimes leave traces. Calculated crimes erase them. The lack of visible disturbance suggests control. Either the person she met intended harm from the beginning, or something escalated unexpectedly and was contained rapidly. Both possibilities point towards someone familiar. I have learned that people rarely disappear into thin air. They disappear into the intentions of others. Vallecas slept that night, unaware that a story had just fractured beneath its streetlights. By morning, a family would be calling her name. By afternoon, a file would be opened. And by evening, a question would echo through Madrid. Where is Esther González? That question still stands. In the next chapter, I will examine the digital shadows she left behind and the behavioral patterns that often reveal more than fingerprints. Because sometimes the loudest clues are not found at the scene. They are found in the silence that follows. My name is Miller Files. When a body is missing, the investigation turns to something else. Data, patterns, signals. Human beings lie. Phones rarely do. In the Esther González case, the physical trail ended quickly. No blood, no abandoned belongings, no eyewitness to a struggle. The streets of Vallecas gave us nothing tangible. So we turned to the invisible architecture surrounding her life. Digital behavior is the modern fingerprint. Every call, every connection to a cell tower, every login leaves a shadow. And shadows, when studied long enough, reveal shape. The first critical element was the final phone call. It lasted less than a minute. Efficient, direct. No prolonged conversation. Calls like that often function as confirmations rather than discussions. I requested a reconstruction of the call detail record. Timestamp, originating number, tower triangulation, duration, signal strength. Every fragment matters. The call came from within a short radius. It was not international, not a masked overseas route. It originated locally. That detail narrows psychological probability. Crimes planned from far away often include digital obfuscation. Local calls imply familiarity and confidence. After the call ended, Esther's phone remained active briefly. It connected to a nearby tower, then it shut off. Not lost signal, not gradual battery decline. A hard power down. That action is intentional. Phones switched off immediately after contact often indicate one of three scenarios. The owner chose privacy. The owner was coerced. The device was disabled by another person. Esther had no documented reason to avoid surveillance that night. She was not fleeing law enforcement. She was not engaged in criminal activity. Her digital history showed ordinary patterns. Social communication, routine searches, nothing secretive. Her social media activity in the days leading up to the disappearance was steady and typical. No goodbye messages, no cryptic posts, no unusual friend requests, no sudden new romantic connection visible in public records. People preparing to vanish frequently reorganize their digital presence. Esther did not. I examined her messaging metadata. Not the content alone, but the rhythm, who she spoke with most, at what times, how frequently. Behavioral consistency is critical. A spike in communication with one person before a disappearance can indicate emotional escalation. There was no dramatic spike. However, there was a subtle regularity in communication with a small circle. That is normal. What matters more is silence. After the final call, her device never reconnected to the network. We often assume phones travel with victims, but phones can also be separated deliberately. If someone wanted to disrupt tracking, shutting off the device near her home would create a false anchor point. Investigators might assume she never left the neighborhood. That possibility concerned me. I studied the geography of Vallecas carefully. If a vehicle was waiting just outside the camera range, Esther could have entered within seconds. If that vehicle moved quickly beyond the nearest tower radius before the phone was powered down, the digital footprint would be distorted. But the tower log suggested the device did not travel far before being switched off. That implies proximity at the time of shutdown, which leads to two possibilities. She remained nearby, or the device remained nearby while she did not. I have seen cases where phones are discarded in drains, dumpsters, or inside buildings to misdirect investigators. A switched-off phone is silent, but it still carries information in its last known handshake with the network. That final handshake occurred within a narrow zone. I asked myself a simple question. If I wanted someone to vanish quietly, and I knew the neighborhood, where would I act? Basements, private garages, storage units, construction sites, vehicles with tinted windows. Digital silence amplifies physical suspicion. Then there is the human element behind the call. Who placed it? Was it a number she saved under a name, or was it unsaved? Unknown numbers before disappearances are common in coercion cases. Familiar saved contacts are more common in trust-based encounters. Reports indicated the number was not entirely foreign to her records. That is important. It suggests previous communication, short call, immediate exit, device shutdown. That sequence does not feel random. Investigators also examine financial data. No sudden cash withdrawal, no purchase of long-distance transportation, no hotel booking, no ride-share history at that hour. In the absence of digital escape planning, voluntary disappearance loses credibility. There is another detail people overlook: behavioral inertia. Human beings resist abrupt change without preparation. Walking into permanent absence without signs of internal crisis is statistically rare. I have studied hundreds of disappearance profiles. The majority that remain unsolved share a common element: a trusted connection in the final hours. I revisited the timing again. Late evening, not midday. Darkness creates psychological insulation. Meetings at night imply privacy. Privacy implies either intimacy or confrontation. If Esther expected a quick conversation, she may not have informed anyone. That would explain why no one accompanied her. Digital evidence does not shout, it whispers. The whisper here says familiarity. It says immediacy. It says controlled interruption. When investigators cannot locate a body or a clear crime scene, they search for behavioral rupture. Who changed after that night? Digital trails continue beyond the victim. The caller's behavior matters as much as hers. Did communication patterns shift? Did someone reduce phone usage suddenly? Did someone travel unexpectedly? Did someone replace a device? These are not cinematic moves. They are subtle adjustments. And subtle adjustments often betray anxiety. The absence of ransom communication is also telling. If this were a financially motivated abduction, contact would follow. Silence indicates either death occurred quickly or the motive was personal rather than economic. When I step back and view the digital map, I see a contained event. Short call, brief movement, intentional shutdown, no reappearance. The phone's silence mirrors the street's silence. But silence does not equal emptiness. It equals concealment. In the next chapter, I will examine the psychological profile of someone capable of executing such a disappearance without noise, and how proximity to the victim becomes the most dangerous variable of all. Because when trust opens the door, violence does not need to knock. My name is Miller Files. In every disappearance where there is no forced entry, no shattered glass, no scream echoing through the night, I return to one principle. Trust narrows the field. When Esther González walked out of her apartment that winter night, she did not display fear. Her body language suggested recognition, not alarm. That detail reshapes the investigation more than any fingerprint could. Strangers create friction. Familiar faces create access. In this chapter, we move closer to the most uncomfortable possibility. Someone inside her circle may hold the answer. When investigators map a victim's life, they begin with concentric rings. Family at the center, close friends just outside, colleagues and acquaintances forming the outer layers. The probability of involvement decreases as distance from the center increases. Statistics across Europe and North America consistently show that adult women who vanish without signs of abduction are most often last seen with someone they know. That is not an accusation, it is a pattern. I studied Esther's immediate circle carefully. Family members were cooperative. Their timelines were documented, alibis cross-checked, emotional responses consistent with shock rather than concealment. Grief is difficult to counterfeit over time. Close friends were interviewed extensively. No reports of recent threats, no visible signs of escalating conflict, no restraining orders, no documented harassment. But conflict does not always present itself publicly. Many disputes unfold quietly: private arguments, jealousy, financial tension, unresolved romantic dynamics. The short phone call again becomes critical. Whoever placed that call had enough influence to bring her outside quickly. That suggests one of two psychological states. Either she felt safe enough not to question it, or she felt compelled enough not to refuse. Compulsion leaves subtle traces. Anxiety, hesitation, text messages seeking reassurance from a friend before stepping out. We saw none of that. The departure appeared calm, which strengthens the trust hypothesis. When I evaluate someone within a victim's circle, I look for post-event behavioral shifts. Did anyone suddenly withdraw socially? Did anyone travel unexpectedly? Did anyone alter daily routines? Did anyone display agitation disproportionate to circumstance? Criminal behavior after a spontaneous violent act often includes overcorrection. The person attempts to appear normal while internally destabilized. It is not dramatic. It is microscopic. A change in tone, a decrease in eye contact, a new pattern of silence. Investigators also reviewed vehicle ownership within her close contacts. A car can become an invisible accomplice. Private garages in Vallecas provide concealment. Basements and storage units extend the timeline before discovery. If Esther entered a vehicle voluntarily, the window of opportunity expands dramatically. There were no reports of a public argument in the street. No witness described a struggle. That indicates the transition from sidewalk to enclosed space was smooth. Smooth transitions suggest familiarity. I also consider motive categories: romantic jealousy, financial dispute, emotional rejection, fear of exposure. These are common catalysts in cases involving known associates. Random violence tends to leave chaos. Personal violence often leaves calculation. One psychological factor stands out in controlled disappearances. The perpetrator believes proximity provides protection. They assume investigators will hesitate to suspect someone integrated into the victim's life. That assumption is often wrong. When I examine interview transcripts, I search for linguistic leakage, over-explanation, defensive phrasing before accusation, unprompted denials. People under stress sometimes reveal anxiety not through content but through structure of speech. There were no immediate collapses in alibi among her closest circle, but absence of collapse does not equal absence of truth. Another dimension to consider is shared secrets. Affairs concealed, financial dependencies, emotional entanglements unspoken publicly. Hidden relationships complicate clean narratives. If Esther had been meeting someone discreetly, that meeting might not appear suspicious at first glance. Night provides cover not only for crime, but for privacy. Let us imagine a scenario. A familiar voice calls. There is tension beneath civility, perhaps unresolved disagreement, perhaps a request to talk privately. She agrees. They meet within walking distance. Words are exchanged. Tone shifts. An argument escalates unexpectedly. What happens next determines whether this becomes a tragic accident or intentional concealment. If the event escalated rapidly, panic might drive immediate concealment, but panic leaves mistakes. If the person had previously contemplated harm, the event may have been premeditated. Premeditation increases efficiency. Efficiency reduces noise. The lack of noise in this case is striking. There is no public scene, no abandoned belongings, no trail leading outward. That implies containment within controlled space. Controlled spaces are rarely random. They belong to someone. In investigations like this, I revisit property records, rental agreements, recently vacated storage units, construction permits, renovation shortly after disappearance. Concrete covers more than foundations. Time also matters. The longer a body remains undiscovered, the more likely it is concealed in a location connected to the perpetrator. Strangers rarely have safe long-term concealment options nearby. Acquaintances do. When I reconstruct the emotional landscape of that evening, I sense familiarity layered with urgency. The brevity of the call suggests no long negotiation. The shutdown of the phone suggests deliberate severing of trace. If the caller understood how digital tracking works, that indicates basic awareness of investigative procedure. We must also consider psychological duality. Some individuals maintain functional public identities while concealing capacity for violence. Employment, social charm, routine normalcy. These characteristics do not negate potential. They camouflage it. When someone vanishes without a ripple, the ripple may have been absorbed privately. Every circle of trust contains vulnerabilities, not because everyone harbors darkness, but because trust reduces caution. Esther stepped into that reduced caution. The circle around her did not fracture visibly in the immediate aftermath, but fractures can be internal. In the next chapter, I will explore the geography of Vallecas itself and how physical space can hide truth in plain sight. Because sometimes the city is not just background, it is an accomplice. My name is Miller Files. Cities do not simply host crimes, they shape them. When I returned to Vallecas to reconstruct the disappearance of Esther González, I stopped thinking about people for a moment. I began thinking about space. Space determines opportunity. Space determines concealment. Space determines time. Vallecas is dense but not chaotic. Apartment blocks rise close together. Narrow streets branch into smaller residential corridors. Underground garages sit beneath buildings like silent lungs. Storage rooms line basements behind reinforced doors. Construction sites appear and disappear with urban renewal. On the surface, it looks ordinary. Underneath it is layered. If Esther stepped outside and met someone she knew, the transition from public to private space could have occurred within seconds. A car parked just beyond a camera's angle. A garage door lifting quietly. A side entrance open from inside. The distance between safety and disappearance can be less than 10 feet. Investigators reviewed every available camera in the immediate radius. Traffic cameras, storefront security systems, residential doorbell systems. The problem was not the absence of cameras. The problem was fragmentation. Each device belongs to a different owner, different angle, different recording duration, different retention policy. A person familiar with the neighborhood would understand those blind spots instinctively. I walked the route Esther was last seen taking. The corner she turned creates a visual interruption. Once past that bend, a vehicle could idle unseen from the previous camera's perspective. It is not dramatic. It is practical. If she entered a vehicle willingly, the vehicle becomes the controlled environment. Windows limit visibility. Doors limit noise. Movement becomes mobile concealment. But suppose she did not leave the neighborhood at all. Suppose the event occurred within Vallecas. Then geography narrows to structures. Private garages offer sound insulation. Basement storage rooms are rarely visited at night. Vacant commercial spaces can remain empty for weeks without inspection. Renovation projects allow concrete to be poured without suspicion. Urban environments provide concealment through normalcy. No one questions the sound of a car engine. No one questions a garage door closing. No one questions construction debris. When I examine disappearance cases in cities, I consider vertical space as much as horizontal. Rooftops, elevator shafts, utility corridors, maintenance rooms. These are not cinematic hiding places. They are overlooked cavities within architecture. Time is the silent accomplice of geography. The longer a body remains undiscovered, the more permanent concealment becomes. If Esther's phone was shut off within a small radius, that suggests containment early. If the phone remained nearby while she was moved, the perpetrator understood the illusion of proximity. Investigators searched abandoned lots and drainage areas. They used dogs trained in detection. They reviewed missing persons databases for unidentified remains across Spain. Nothing. Absence can indicate removal beyond the immediate area. But removal requires risk. Transporting a body through city streets carries exposure. Cameras at highway exits, toll booths, random patrols. Which scenario requires less risk? Long-distance transport or concealment within walking distance? Most offenders choose the path of least exposure. There is also the psychological factor of territory. Individuals often commit crimes in environments they feel they control. Familiar streets reduce anxiety. Known routes reduce hesitation. If the perpetrator lived or worked in Vallecas, concealment options multiply. I requested examination of recent property changes within the radius of her last signal. New tenants, vacated units, sudden remodeling, large trash disposal shortly after her disappearance. Concrete work particularly interests me. Fresh flooring, newly sealed basements, rapid renovations. Concrete hardens within hours. Questions harden with it. Another layer of geography is community perception. Vallecas residents reported no unusual noise. No suspicious screams. That reinforces the theory of containment within insulated space. Urban disappearances often rely on invisibility created by routine. You can carry heavy objects at night and no one assumes violence. You can load a trunk and neighbors assume travel. You can open a garage door at midnight and no one counts the minutes. Space does not accuse, it absorbs. I stood in an underground parking structure near where Esther was last seen. The air was cold. Sound echoed softly, but did not carry beyond concrete walls. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. If something happened there, only those inside would know. Garages are transitional spaces. People enter, people exit. No one lingers. If a confrontation occurred within a vehicle parked in such a space, it would be invisible from the street. If the event escalated inside an apartment, soundproof walls could suppress alarm. Urban residents grow accustomed to muffled noise from neighbors. A thud becomes furniture moved. A raised voice becomes television volume. Cities normalize ambiguity. The absence of a body suggests either exceptional concealment or distance beyond initial search parameters. But the early phone shutdown keeps pulling me back to proximity. It feels local. Geography also affects disposal methods. Rivers exist beyond central Madrid. Remote rural areas can be reached within an hour by car. Forested terrain provides isolation, yet those require deliberate travel. Travel creates digital and visual trace unless meticulously planned. The simplest explanation often lies closest to origin. If Esther trusted the person she met, she may have walked only a few steps before her world contracted to a confined space. From that point forward, the city would continue moving, buses running, windows glowing, people sleeping, and somewhere within that grid, a secret settling into walls. In the next and final chapter, I will reconstruct a probable sequence of events based on behavioral logic, digital silence, and geographic containment. Not to accuse, but to understand, because understanding is the first step toward truth. My name is Miller Files. For weeks, we have examined silence. Digital silence, street silence, emotional silence. Now we attempt something investigators rarely say out loud. Reconstruction. Reconstruction is not accusation. It is structured imagination guided by evidence. When facts are incomplete, logic becomes the bridge between what is known and what is hidden. Let us return to the winter night in Vallecas. Esther González receives a short phone call. The voice on the other end is not alarming. It is familiar. The conversation is brief because it does not need to be long. The understanding already exists between them. She puts on her coat. She steps outside expecting a short exchange. The street is calm. The air is cold. She turns the corner. Someone is waiting. There is no visible tension at first. Perhaps they speak quietly. Perhaps they walk a few steps together. The interaction appears ordinary to anyone watching from a window. At some point within minutes, something shifts. It could be an argument that escalates faster than expected. It could be a revelation that triggers panic. It could be premeditation concealed beneath casual tone. If the person intended harm from the beginning, the setting was chosen carefully. Near enough to reduce suspicion. Private enough to prevent interruption. If harm was not pre-planned, then the escalation happened inside a controlled space. A vehicle door closes. A garage door lowers. An apartment door locks. Inside that confined environment, noise becomes manageable. Struggle becomes invisible. The phone is powered down deliberately, not thrown, not broken, switched off. Why switch it off instead of destroying it? Because destruction leaves fragments. A clean shutdown suggests composure. Composure suggests either prior contemplation or rapid psychological adjustment. In spontaneous violence, offenders often panic. They flee. They abandon evidence. They make mistakes. Here we see no chaotic trail. So what follows? If death occurred quickly, the next decision becomes concealment. The offender evaluates risk. Streets are still active. Cameras still recording. Immediate transport carries exposure. The safer choice may be temporary concealment within a known space. Hours pass. Night deepens. The neighborhood sleeps. At some point, the body is either moved or permanently hidden. If moved, it is done when traffic is minimal. If hidden locally, it is placed somewhere insulated. A storage room, a construction cavity, beneath flooring, within a structure that no one inspects routinely. The following morning, the city continues. Esther does not return. The person who last saw her alive now carries a private knowledge that reshapes their existence. From that moment forward, every news report becomes a mirror. Every police statement becomes a threat. Behavior changes subtly. Sleep patterns shift. Conversations are measured carefully. Emotional reactions are calibrated to appear appropriate. Some offenders over-participate in search efforts. Others withdraw. But over time, maintaining dual reality erodes stability. I have observed that guilt does not always produce confession. Sometimes it produces rigidity, emotional flattening, irritability. Investigators monitor these changes quietly. Now consider motive. Romantic entanglement remains plausible. Jealousy can transform ordinary disputes into fatal encounters within seconds. Financial disagreement is another catalyst. Fear of exposure can drive extreme action. What motive aligns best with digital silence and geographic containment? Personal motive. This does not feel transactional. No ransom, no attempt to monetize disappearance, no communication after the fact. It feels contained between two people. If the offender believed the absence of a body would stall prosecution, they were correct. Many legal systems require physical evidence to proceed confidently. No body complicates certainty. But absence is not innocence. In Reconstruction, I imagine two timelines diverging at the moment she turned the corner. In one timeline, she returns home after a brief conversation. The night ends quietly. In the other, something irreversible occurs. We live in the second timeline. The reason cases like this endure is not because there are no answers. It is because the answers are locked inside one or two individuals who choose silence. Silence can be strategic. Silence can be fear-driven. Silence can be self-preservation. But silence has weight. I often ask myself what Esther's final conscious thought may have been. Surprise, confusion, betrayal. Betrayal is common when trust precedes violence. Trust lowers defenses. It opens proximity. It allows doors to close behind you without suspicion. When trust is exploited, disappearance becomes seamless. The reconstruction suggests familiarity, proximity, controlled environment, deliberate digital severance, localized concealment. It does not require a criminal mastermind. It requires opportunity and emotional trigger. The tragedy of this case lies not only in absence but in uncertainty. Families cannot grieve fully without finality. Communities cannot heal without clarity. As investigators, we operate in probability when certainty is unavailable. Probability here points inward rather than outward. Someone within Esther's world knows more than they have said. Time does not erase truth. It compresses it. Walls eventually speak. Concrete cracks. Technology advances. People confess when pressure accumulates beyond tolerance. The city of Vallecas continues to breathe. Children grow. Businesses open and close. Apartments change tenants. But beneath that movement remains an unresolved question. Where is Esther González? Until that question is answered with evidence, this case remains open in the only place that truly matters. Memory. My name is Miller Files, and some disappearances are not vanishing acts. They are concealed decisions.